Okay, I'm going to be discussing anarcho-capitalism. It's an ideology in which I am pretty well versed in, as I used to be an anarcho-capitalist until I reevaluated my position on the subject, and I reevaluated it and changed my mind for the following reason, which I'm about to illustrate to you. Okay. Alright, the best way to put this in perspective is through the context of the extremes on both sides of the spectrum. On one side of the spectrum, we have totalitarianism, in which the state is all-powerful and individual liberty is non-existent. And on the other side, we have anarchism, in which the restrictive functions of the state have been totally abolished, and unchecked individualism is the law of the land. Now, how would this hypothetical anarchist societal structure function? Well, let us first assume that the economic structure of any given society would remain intact, and in the case of the United States, it would continue to be capitalism, and in other various other capitalist societies, it would continue to be capitalism. Voluntary contractual system. Okay, now that there is no longer a state to provide for services such as security, defense, and education, there would now be a demand from the public for private companies to fill the void. The individual, upon seeing that there was now a demand for him to provide this security, defense, education, etc., would begin to form privatized police, military, and educational institutions. Now that state regulation has been abolished, there would no longer be any checks on monopolies. Individual companies, each doing what is in their own economic interests, would form into large conglomerates. So now a societal structure is beginning to form, which in fact looks very state-like. Not only has it taken on the form of the state, but through the formation of these large conglomerates, in which every aspect of society is controlled by a single entity, the society has in fact become totalitarian in nature, in that these large conglomerates would now control traditionally privatized services, the production and distribution of consumer goods, as well as traditionally public services such as security, defense, and education. In effect, the individual liberty which the abolishment of the state was supposed to provide has been all but eliminated, and in the place of the government of, by, and for the people, we are now left with a government of, by, and for the government. Okay, now I'm going to get a little bit more into this, and I'm going to use Hayek's argument against socialism, which I feel works equally well as an argument against anarcho-capitalism, because we must assume that these conglomerates will form. I cannot think of one single reason without the coercive role of the state why these conglomerates wouldn't form. It would be inevitable. Human beings are rational creatures doing and they would inevitably do what is in their own self-interest. And what would be in the corporation's self-interest would be the forming of these large conglomerates. So, with that assumption on the table, I'm going to get into it. I'm going to read an annotated portion of Hayek's The Road to Serfdom, and then I'm going to discuss it a little bit. Okay. Planning and power. In order to achieve their ends, the planners must create power over men wielded by other men, of a magnitude never before known. Their success will depend on the extent on which they achieve this power. Democracy is an obstacle to this expression of freedom, which the centralized direction of economic activity requires. Hence arises a clash between planning and democracy. Many socialists have the tragic illusion that by depriving private individuals of the power they possess in an individualist system, and transferring this power to society, they thereby extinguish power. What they overlook is that by concentrating power so that it can be used in the service of a single plan, it is not merely transformed, but infinitely heightened. By uniting in the hands of some single body, power formerly exercised independently by many, an amount of power is created infinitely greater than that existed before. So much far-reaching as almost to be different in kind. It is entirely fallacious to argue that the great power exercised by a central planning board would be no greater than the power collectively exercised by private boards of directors. There is in a competitive society nobody who can exercise even a fraction of the power which a socialist planning board would possess. To decentralize power is to reduce the absolute amount of power, and the competitive system is the only system designed to minimize the power exercised by man over man. Who can seriously doubt that the power which a millionaire, who may be my employer, has over me is very much less than which the smallest bureaucrat possesses who wields the coercive power of the state, and on whose discretion it depends how I am allowed to live and work. In every real sense, a badly paid, unskilled workman in this country has more freedom to shape his life than many an employer in Germany or much better paid engineer or manager in Russia. If he wants to change his job, a place where he lives, if he wants to profess certain views or spend his leisure in a particular way, he faces no absolute impediments. There are no dangers to bodily harm, bodily security, and freedom that confine him by brute force to the task and environment to which a superior has assigned him. Our generation has forgotten that the system of private property is the most important guarantee of freedom. It is only because the control of the means of production is divided among many people acting independently that we as individuals can decide what to do with ourselves. When all the means of production are vested in a single hand, whether it be not only that of the society as a whole or that of a dictator, whoever exercises this control has complete power over us. In the hands of the private individuals, what is called economic power can be an instrument of coercion, but it is never control over the whole life of the person. But when economic power is centralized as an instrument of political power, it creates a degree of dependence scarcely distinguishable from slavery. It has been well said that in a country where the sole employer is the state, opposition means death by slow starvation. Now, basically, Hayek's argument is that whenever you put the means of production into a single hand, the power of whoever exercises that control of the means of production will be infinitely heightened. Now, I think that argument totally defeats socialist illusions. However, I think that argument is a very powerful argument against anarcho-capitalism, in that, of course, these large conglomerates are going to form, and that the means of production will be concentrated into a single entity, whereas under the state, which exists and is capable of using its coercive role to prevent monopoly, in that system we have many individual companies each competing, so every aspect of society is not controlled by that one single entity. However, you take the state out of the equation, there's nothing to prevent these monopolies from forming. We're going to have these large conglomerates, each controlling pretty much every aspect of the state, from traditionally private services to the production and distribution of consumer goods, food, and the like, to traditionally public services such as education, military, defense, etc. So these large conglomerates, doing what is in their own interests, are gonna. These large corporations will form conglomerates in which they control all those things, and these monopolies will form. There's no getting around that fact. I cannot see one single reason why these conglomerates would not form. If you want to comment on that, maybe you have a reason that I haven't thought of why these conglomerations wouldn't form. I'm all ears, and I would love to hear it. Maybe I'll reevaluate my ideas if you could think of one reason why. If not, then your idea of anarcho-capitalism will do nothing but lead to totalitarianism in the long run. I cannot see any way around that inevitable consequence of the coercive role of the state being taken away from society altogether. Thank you. That's it.